Welcome to the Congress Week. Today we're going to be talking about the structure and powers of Congress. So Congress as an institution versus congressional behavior, which is what we're going to cover on Thursday, which is my favorite lecture. This is, fun fact, possibly my favorite reading that I assigned to you guys. This is excerpts from Mayhew's 1974 book, Congress, the Electoral Connection. It is perhaps one of two, along with Richard Fenno's Homestyle in 1978, seminal pieces discussing Congress that much of the congressional literature of the modern era is built on. Mayhew makes this what is ostensibly a qualitative or largely theoretical, very long essay that's about as long as a book. The excerpts that you got are from multiple chapters, but kind of go over the entire gist of his argument. So can somebody please tell me what Mayhew is arguing here? Members of Congress, when I say MC, that's not Master of Ceremonies, that is Member of Congress, are predominantly electorally motivated. The quintessential quote, and also one of the first lines in my dissertation, is that members of Congress are principally seekers of re-election. That is what predominates their political behavior. They don't care about you. They don't care about making good policy. They don't care about representation. They care about power. They aren't vote maximizers. You like to have this idea, and by you I mean the kind of royal you, people who are not political scientists or politicians, have this idea that politicians are out there to get your vote. They want to win your vote. They want you specifically to vote for them because you're special and good at skateboarding or something, but that's not true. They don't care about you individually. They care about you in general. They're not looking to get 80% of the vote. Nobody actually cares about an electoral mandate. They need one more than 50%, and that's it. As long as they have one more than 50%, that's all that matters. There's a quote that came out of Jonathan Bolton's book about the first Trump administration that shocked a lot of the public, that says that President Trump cared more about being reelected than he did about the American people. And political scientists looked at that and said, of course he did. He's a politician. That is all any of them care about. They don't care about policy or you people in general, right? Like maybe they want to pass some good policy, but the way they seek utility is through re-election. And all they need is 50+1. There are certain ways that members of Congress, according to Mayhew, can position themselves to then get that 50+1 vote. He identifies three of them, three ways that members of Congress can win elections. Can anyone tell me what those three are, or even what one of them is? More or less. Advertising is a little bit more pointed than that. It's essentially getting yourself out there. You need to get your name out there so people know who you are. You're advertising yourself. It's advertising in the kind of media marketing sense, right? What you're saying overlaps a little bit with the other two. Yeah, kind of, but they are trying to claim full credit for everything that's good. Basically, they want to say everything that's bad doesn't have my name associated with it. And anything that is good, anything and everything, that was me. I got that done for you. That's why if you look at bills in Congress, there'll be like one or two primary sponsors, and those are the guys who actually did the work to write the bill, or really did the work of getting lobbied by some think tank that wrote the bill for them and then put it on the floor. And then there are like this many just pages and pages of co-sponsors. That doesn't actually happen, but there are usually a good 10 to 15 on there. And say, I co-sponsored legislation to help you, when basically it's, Joe Schmo from Indiana wrote it, and I realized it could help my constituents, and they would like it maybe, so I put my name on it. But then, like you said, there is kind of nuance in there and downplaying it too, where you have your name attached to something that may or may not be popular, so you can kind of credit claim for something else that's a little bit higher profile than, the thing that's unpopular. What's the third thing? Position taking is basically, I'm getting out there and this is what I believe in. I'm going to make a position, and often those positions are really broad in general. You ever see an interview with a politician and the interviewer asks them a question, and then they don't really answer it, but they've said a lot of words. A lot of that is where position taking falls in, where it's like, well, do you support Senator so-and-so's family tax credit that they've proposed? And then, the other senator they're interviewing says, well, I don't know about all that, but what I can tell you is that I support family. Absolutely. I am for families here and there, whether that's through this tax credit, which, we're still talking about, or through, just shaking their hands or going to church dinners. Well, let me tell you, I go to church. And then they end up talking about, their own religious views or something like that. It's a lot of spin, a lot of words, a lot of ways around it. This is the central takeaway that I think you guys should pay attention to here, right? They're predominantly electorally motivated. They aren't vote maximizers. They get what they need. And these three things, right? These three things they can do to win elections. Constitution Corner. I assigned you basically all of Article 1. Everybody should have at this point read all of Article 1 enough that they're kind of tired of me going over it. Have we reached that point yet? Yeah, great. Awesome. Congress, structures and powers. As I said, a lot of this lecture is going to be review. Everybody's so tired of Article 1, we're going to go over it again. All right, we have a bicameral legislature. Everybody should know what bicameralism is here. Can someone tell me what bicameralism is? Two houses. Yes. Those houses are the House of Representatives, the People's House, the lower house, and the Senate, the highfalutin upper house. We also have a separation of powers between them. Each of them have their own responsibilities and duties, though they do often overlap. There are enumerated powers, including taxing and spending, as well as all of the things we covered in the Checks and Balances lecture and the Separation of Powers video. And finally, of course, they have certain checks and balances that we have already gone over and that we will go over again in this lecture. All of this is basically to tell you to understand Congress, the Constitution. These are the key points to take away from that. So, we do have these two houses. We have the House of Representatives with their very official-looking seal, and the Senate seal over here with their little red hat on it. I love the Senate seal because it has that little goofy hat in it. The House is apportioned by population. When I say apportioned, I mean that's how we decide who serves, how they represent those people. The House is capped to 435 seats. Those are dictated every 10 years, or in the case of Texas and California, whenever they feel like it, based on the population of each state. The states then draw districts and decide to send people to Congress based on those districts. We'll see what a district map looks like later in the lecture. The Senate has 100 seats. There are 2 senators for each state. As I have hinted at before, there are criticisms of this. For instance, a state like Montana or Alaska, with very few people, has the same representation in the Senate as a state that is very populous, like California. Understanding that this was the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Plan, during the Constitutional Convention, it was necessary in order for our country to exist in the first place. The chief criticism comes that it is no longer necessary for our country to continue to run. Again, the House is apportioned based on population. The Senate is apportioned based on states. The term lengths between them differ. The House is re-elected every 2 years. So essentially, every 2 years, we have an entirely new House of Representatives. That's why, when they say the 119th Congress, they are referring to the Congress that occupies their seats during those 2 years. The Senate then is elected staggered, so a third of the Senate is re-elected every 2 years. All of them turn over every 6 years. The vice president is president of the Senate. They break ties in the Senate. So say there are 50 senators voting for one thing and 50 senators voting for the other. The vice president comes in and breaks that tie. Key point here is because of these re-election cycles, senators and representatives face different constituencies. By that, I mean a representative in the House of Representatives only has to represent about 50 to 60,000 people, sometimes more, sometimes a little less. Their constituencies are much more homogeneous. as in they are much more similar to each other internally. You talk about rural districts or urban districts. AOC, representing part of Brooklyn, understands her constituency as this urban left-leaning constituency. Someone like, just going to use an example of the district I grew up in, Lloyd Smucker, representing rural Pennsylvania, understands his constituency much more through the lens of Amish voters and even Puerto Rican immigrants in Lancaster City. They are able to pinpoint a little bit more of what their districts look like. The Senate faces a constituency that is statewide, and therefore is much more susceptible to this notion of nationalization. Does anyone know what I mean when I say nationalization? One of the myths that we like to think too about politics is if we send someone to Congress, they're going to represent me. But in a modern age of social media, politics is becoming nationalized. We are no longer focused so much on budgets for your local school board or for your appropriations to improve infrastructure in your city, and we are much more concerned with identitarian issues, trans people in bathrooms, and foreign policy in a way that we didn't necessarily used to be concerned with. Inherently, senators are more nationalized in their focus because their constituencies are more heterogeneous. They are more dissimilar from each other. While you might have a state like California that leans heavily blue and their senators are both Democrats, within that, they're going to view representation a bit differently than, let's take two examples from California. Again, Ro Khanna, who represents a very left-leaning but Silicon Valley kind of business-oriented district in the House of Representatives. He is going to be able to lean a little bit more left than, say, someone who represents Orange County. So the president pro tempore is just the senior member of the Senate, just the oldest dude they got in there. And basically, they're the one who is kind of in charge of the daily governance of the Senate. Member demographics, everybody. Speaking of old, Congress is old. Here we have the late Dianne Feinstein. She represented California in the Senate. She was quite old and died in office. To the right, we have Mitch McConnell. He is a senator from the state of Kentucky and used to be the majority leader in the Senate. Congress is also pretty wealthy. It costs a lot of money to run for election. Sure, you can raise that money through fundraising and through individual donors, but still, even individuals like Bernie Sanders, who is an economic populist on the left, rails against billionaires, is himself a millionaire. He's a modest millionaire, I should say, but he is still quite wealthy. Keep in mind, the Senate tends to be wealthier than the House, simply because it costs a lot more to run an election that is statewide than it does to run an election that is only for a few people in a few counties. Despite recent advances in descriptive representation, by descriptive representation I mean if Congress looks like the country, right? 10% of Americans are African American, 10% of Congress should be African American, in your head if it's perfect descriptive representation. Congress is still pretty white. Part of that is incumbency, we'll get into that. Part of that is wealth. Part of that is systemic racism. There is still a gender imbalance. Congress tends to be pretty masculine, pretty male. Again, the Senate is much worse at this than the House, but that is reaching closer and closer to parity. By parity, I'm meaning an equal number of women as there are men. And there is growing diversity in Congress. Members of Congress serve different constituencies, not just statewide versus district, but within their individual constituencies. They serve what I see as three main groups. They serve individual constituents. You folks, you guys have problems with your passport or whatever, you call up Tim Scott's office and you're like, hey, I want to go to Fiji and I can't. And Tim Scott's office is like, okay, let me talk. We'll get something to do with your passport. Fun fact, if you do actually have problems with your passport, you should call your senator, not your representative. They will actually help you. They also serve organized interests. This used to be more of a thing before they kind of went bankrupt, but members of Congress used to get ratings, grades from the NRA based on how gun-friendly they were, and that was a big deal. But also, members of Congress are served by local chambers of Congress. In addition to being funded by those people, they then represent those people. They take audiences with them. Finally, they represent this nebulous idea of their district as a whole. This idea that I am serving members of X state. This, again, is Jim Clyburn. He is the Democratic representative in the House of Representatives of this kind of pinkish district here that extends from North Charleston up through Richland County. This is where you guys are right now. All the way out kind of through here and down into Georgia. It's a really weird district. They serve these constituents through, and if we're talking about individual constituents, casework here, right? Think about what I said. You have a problem with your passport, you call up your member of Congress and you say, I have a problem with my passport. Or you're having a problem with your disability check if you are a veteran or something. You contact your member of Congress, their office will probably actually do something for you. These are options that are available to you. Projects are more district as a whole. This is, I got money for this school, I got money for this bridge. Jim Clyburn just worked to get a federal grant to, along with the mayor of Columbia, to either elevate or bury or reroute a lot of the train lines in Columbia, because I don't know about you guys, but at least twice a week I get stuck for 15 minutes behind a train and then my day is ruined. And so they're trying to fix that. There's also this notion of symbolic leadership. I'm going to talk about this first in a racial context. There are racial caucuses in both houses of Congress. The Congressional Black Caucus is most notable for this, and they work together to advance certain issues that particularly affect those communities. There's also a fun fact, like a House Portuguese caucus, because there's a huge Portuguese population in Connecticut in particular. So they serve those groups in that way, but then there's also famously the Congressional Women's Caucus. Often in protest of certain things or for certain events, you will see them appear all wearing white. It is an effort to show that they are leading for those groups of people and representing them, even if they aren't specifically their constituents. Congressional elections. This is an election map, I believe, from the last congressional election in 2024. As we said, the House gets reelected every 2 years. The Senate is staggered over 6 years. The key fact here is that American elections are run at the state and local level. This is what makes them so secure. Regardless of what you hear on either side of the aisle, American elections are now and historically have been intensely secure affairs because their authority and governance is diffused. The strongest people when it comes to elections are not the people at the top. It's your people in the county that actually count those votes and care about them. There is this thing that happens where we have a high incumbency rate. What is incumbency? Well, first off, let's explain what an incumbent is. I am running for Congress for a very first time. I am just a candidate. I then win. When I run again, I am an incumbent. I am someone who has served in office before. In Congress, there is a high incumbency rate, that meaning that if you have won in the past, it is a high predictor that you will win again in the future. Challengers don't often succeed, challengers being people who are going up against an incumbent. There is some partisan competition, as in between parties in certain districts, particularly in purple states like Pennsylvania or North Carolina, or, as Democrats would like to think, Texas. But most of the competition in congressional elections actually comes in the primary. Because of the high incumbency, and because we are geographically polarized, that being, you see all this red, those are entirely red areas, you see all this blue, those are entirely blue areas. Because we are geographically polarized, and there are certain districts that are historically Republican and certain districts that are historically Democrat, and they will continue to be so until the end of whenever. Most competition actually comes in the primary. Let's talk about incumbency advantage a little bit. This image, yeah, this is Strom Thurmond showing you how physically active he is after probably smoking like 3 cartons of cigarettes. So I use Strom Thurmond as an example here because he quite literally served in Congress till he was 100 years old. He served the state of South Carolina for so long that he was not early in his career when he was filibustering the Civil Rights Act, and continued to serve in Congress until the president before we actually had a black president. He served until the Bush administration, the second one. So he is, when I think of an incumbent, the incumbent. How incumbency works is first through name recognition. Congressional elections are what we would call low salience. People don't know what happens in them a lot of the time. Like, let's be honest, how many of you knew who Jim Clyburn was before you sat in this class? Even though he's served forever. Probably not a lot of you, and that's fine. That's fine. They also have a fundraising edge. If you're a known quantity and you have been in office for a while, you guys kind of know where to rub elbows with lobbyists and donors and how to get money for your election. So even if you are in an abundantly Republican district or an abundantly Republican state and you're running as a Republican, you can still outshine your primary opponent there. Additionally, what kind of goes with name recognition is that you have a history of constituent services. There is some power in word of mouth. If you help some guy with his passport and he decides, I really like this guy. He helped me with my passport, and my vacation in Fiji was magical, and I didn't have to worry about it. So whenever I think of Strom Thurmond, I think about Fiji. And that's why I vote for him. And maybe that person will go and knock doors and support this candidate in a very active way. There is, of course, lower turnover when it comes to incumbents. Because of all of these advantages, it's much harder to get an incumbent out of office. And with that comes electoral security. There is a large discussion now in the literature whether or not incumbency advantage actually matters or exists. It could just be that you are in a district that has become polarized or partisan, and you are the clearest, most visible Democrat or Republican in that district. This also goes along with the classic phrase that I hate Congress, but I love my congressman. We already talked a little bit about apportionment. Let's talk about the second half here, right? Essentially, states can gain and lose seats in the House of Representatives based on population shifts and migration. And we do actually see that population shifts are happening, and happening at a somewhat accelerated rate. The South and the West of the United States are growing, and they are gaining more representation. The Deep South in particular, as well as states like Texas, are gaining a lot of representation because there are more people moving there. Cost of living is cheaper. The weather is, I guess, a little nicer. The Northeast and the Midwest are shrinking, so industrial centers and the Rust Belt are losing seats because people don't want to live there anymore, I guess. People are moving out of New York, people are moving out of Illinois, people are moving out of Pennsylvania and moving to these areas. Even so, California even lost some seats. Congressional committees are important. I cannot emphasize this enough. They are the gatekeepers of legislation. The way that Congress is organized, not every bill is going to come to the floor of either house for an actual vote for passage. We send it to specialized committees so that they can funnel through legislation and decide what is actually good for the country, or kill it because they disagree with it personally. There are certain standing committees. Committees like Ways and Means, Armed Services, the House Rules Committee, and Appropriations. And these are committees that exist no matter what Congress we are in, the 118th, the 119th. They continue to exist no matter what. There are also more specialized committees that each individual iteration of Congress can choose to add or remove based on the needs of the time. There's a strong argument in favor of congressional committees that they offer policy specialization. I tend to agree with this. The idea that someone who has been in Congress a long time and is serving on a committee for a long time, say you are from Idaho and you're on the Agriculture Committee, you're going to gain a lot of specialized knowledge in agricultural policy that a freshman member of Congress or someone who has historically served on another committee just won't have. You are becoming an expert in your field, in other words. There are subcommittees within committees, that's just a structural note. And committees have this intense gatekeeping power. One of the most powerful positions that you can possibly have is to be chair of the Appropriations Committee. And from that, you can get some pretty powerful leaders in Congress out of the committee structure. Historically, the committee structure was done by seniority. Let's roll back time to the 80s, early 90s, and before. It was kind of seen as good, respectful politics to assign the oldest, longest-serving member of that committee within, party limits to be that chair. Then, right? They have the most institutional knowledge. In the 1990s, this guy Newt Gingrich. He comes in the early 2000s. You have convicted pedophile Dennis Hastert. He comes in, and they say, "No, we're now going to assign committee chairs based on party loyalty. You, if you are the most loyal Republican or the most loyal Democrat," I'm going to say Republican because both Dennis Hastert and Newt Gingrich were Republicans, "you're going to get the chair seat." All right, everybody, we're going to get into our first spatial model of voting. So, this is a spatial model of voting here. We have policies on a spectrum here. You have policies all the way over to the left, policies all the way over to the right here. So think about this in terms of like abortion. This is pro-choice all the time, no restrictions. This is pro-life all the time, no abortion whatsoever. All right, does that make sense? We have a spectrum there. In a committee, as with the electorate, but perhaps more so, the median voter is a decisive position. By median voter, I mean the person who holds the median position on a spectrum. Let's talk about this for a second here. So, say these are all individual members of Congress, right? Here we have a staunch Democrat who's in support of abortion all the time, no restrictions, right to choose. Over here, we have a Republican who says you can't have abortion whatsoever, even in cases of rape and incest. They have a spectrum of acceptable positions that they would agree with, right? Their ideal position is in the middle right here, right? That's think about this as their likelihood of preferring something, their preference, right? So the height of their preference, that is what they want, right? And under this little bell-shaped curve, they're able to support policies under there based on their own values, right? But to diminishing levels. So they would much prefer a policy that is here versus a policy that is here. Does that make sense if we're just talking about an individual member? Same thing for all of these people. They have this distribution of policies that they support. One would think, then, that the position would default to member 3. While their tails of their position don't even reach close to member 1 or member 5's position, those tails slope off toward them in infinity, right? So they would be the median position in this, right? The average, the middle. I'm conflating terms here. The median can change when we introduce this idea of coalitions. So say you have a coalition of members 4 and 5 and a coalition of member 1 and 2. Members 1 and 2 want a policy that's right here between x1 and x2. Members 4 and 5 want a policy that is the meeting here between x4 and x5. That leaves out member 3. If members 4 and 5 are able to sway member 3 over, the policy they're actually going to go with is x4. This is made all the more powerful when you think that member 4 or member 5 or member 3 could be the committee chair. They're in a position of power too. And so their ability to build coalitions among these people here is much stronger. They have a gatekeeping role. And these coalitions of power here in these committees actually shape the final outcome of policy. So say we send in a policy that starts under the acceptable distribution of policies to member 3, but the coalition within the committee is between member 3, 4, and member 5, it's going to leave committee looking like a policy member 4 would like, and that's what's going to actually hit the floor of Congress. There are formal powers in Congress. We've already talked about them. Tax and spend, they regulate commerce, they can declare war, president is commander-in-chief, they confirm nominees through advise and consent, and they also have impeachment power. This is the live tally of votes to initiate articles of impeachment against Donald Trump the second time following the January 6th insurrection. We already know congressional checks. They can use oversight hearings. This isn't just for them to gather information and inform their policies, but also to shine a public eye on some issue that they care about. So there is a visual kind of media component to oversight hearings as well. They can start investigations. There was a large discussion in 2022 when the Republicans took charge of the House of Representatives, particularly prompted by Jim Jordan, who is a representative from Ohio, that he was going to basically weaponize the investigation power of Congress to stymie the Biden administration. That's perfectly legal for them to do. Congress has the power to investigate. They have power of the budget, as I said, power of the purse. They have the ability to override vetoes, though this in practice anymore just doesn't happen. And of course, the Senate has the power to advise and consent. That deals with nominations and approving those nominations. A lot of this is review. We're going to preview the content from next class. I'm going to talk a lot about how parties are the thing that really matters in Congress. Part of that is this idea of partisan polarization rising. We also have the power for parties to control the agenda in Congress. And of course, these electoral pressures that we hint at with Mayhew are dominant, more than any of these structural concerns, more than any of the powers that they have listed. The idea that they're there to do good policy is kind of a relic of the past. They are there to be reelected. And of course, this produces challenges